One day, SpongeBob SquarePants wakes up, and our lovable, goofy sponge is gone. He's taken a dark turn. His infectious laughter is gone. Instead, he now features a sinister grin across his face that seems to replace his trademark optimism. And his love for jellyfishing, it is overpowered by a thirst for control. What if all this time he was hiding more secrets than we ever realized? What if he was actually a master manipulator, quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes, while all of us were fooled? Every innocent smile, every cheerful "I'm ready," it was all part of the act. SpongeBob is no longer the sponge we thought we knew. But let's face it, no one wakes up one day and says, "I'm going to ruin everyone's lives today." SpongeBob's villain origin story starts with a series of gut-punch betrayals. For years, SpongeBob dedicated his life to the Krusty Krab. Day in and day out, he flipped patties with enthusiasm and passion. And for what? A minimum wage paycheck and a boss, Mr. Krabs, who cared more about squeezing every last penny out of his employees than showing any real appreciation. The breaking point came on what seemed like a normal day. SpongeBob had an idea that could revolutionize the Krabby Patty and bring in more customers than ever. He wanted to introduce new flavors, and we have already seen him coming up with new ideas in the episode Wormy Patty Hype. In this episode, the Krusty Krab is failing because the restaurant hasn't had customers in weeks. But then Incidental 42 arrives and orders a meal. But he later refuses to eat it, saying that there are no pizzas in the Krusty Krab.
Yeah, sure, but where's the pizzazz?
SpongeBob remains ignored by Mr. Krabs. Finally, having his attention, SpongeBob shows him a green patty. Mr. Krabs is disgusted, thinking that the patty is spoiled, and tries to burn it. But this doesn't stop SpongeBob. With Patrick's help, SpongeBob sets up a stand in front of his house to sell his pretty patties, which remains unsuccessful until one customer spots a purple patty, and boom, everyone is now loving SpongeBob's pretty patties. Mr. Krabs, who previously laughed at the idea, now wants a piece of the cake. SpongeBob, being the naive fry cook he was, didn't understand the true colors of Mr. Krabs at that time. Anyway, the idea still failed because the pretty patties had a side effect. But things are going to change this time. This time, SpongeBob solved the issue and actually created colorful patties that were healthy to eat. He should have been credited for this invention, but instead of getting credit, Mr. Krabs brushed him off, saying, "Just stick to the grill, boy." But then, SpongeBob overhears Krabs secretly pitching SpongeBob's idea to a client. He was taking full credit for it. And something snaps. For the first time, SpongeBob felt betrayal. But that wasn't all. His personal life began to crumble too. Patrick, his best friend, started hanging out with Sandy more. Maybe Patrick thought SpongeBob was too busy with his job, but it hurt SpongeBob to see that Sandy and Patrick had become the new best friends. They are constantly leaving SpongeBob out of their plans. At first, SpongeBob thought it was just a misunderstanding. Patrick and Sandy were probably busy with their science experiments or karate sessions. But it wasn't just one or two missed invites, it was every invite. Patrick stopped showing up at SpongeBob's Pineapple for jellyfishing mornings. And Sandy? She didn't even mention their usual karate sparring anymore. SpongeBob would see them walking by, laughing and having the time of their lives, as if he had never been part of their little circle. And what about Squidward? Oh, Squidward never held back his hate, but when SpongeBob reached out for advice, even Squidward slammed the door in his face. I mean, this sounds like everything SpongeBob believed in friendship, loyalty, hard work was a lie. All of Bikini Bottom was closing in on him. And let's not forget Gary. Poor Gary. SpongeBob loses his beloved snail in a freak boating accident because, well, he never learned how to drive. Look, it's been what, a full year? Get it together, man. Gary's loss sends SpongeBob spiraling. The guilt eats him alive, turning that big ol' heart of his into a little shriveled up sea sponge of bitterness. And you know what they say, hurt people hurt people. SpongeBob, our cheerful fry cook, is now a volcano of resentment just waiting to erupt. SpongeBob doesn't just wake up evil. No, this is a process. First he stops laughing. No more Instead, he develops this dry, sarcastic chuckle, the kind that makes you think, this guy's seen things. One night, SpongeBob thought about all the times he'd been laughed at, all the times his kindness had been taken for granted, and then, as if fueled by some dark spark, SpongeBob stood up. He wasn't the happy-go-lucky fry cook anymore. He was tired of being ignored, tired of being used. That was the night he decided he'd show them all. He'd show Patrick, Sandy, Squidward, and especially Mr. Krabs that SpongeBob SquarePants wasn't just a goofy little sponge. He was powerful. The next day, he started small. He walked past Patrick and Sandy without saying hello. When Patrick tried to wave him over, SpongeBob just kept walking. Then came the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob showed up to work on time as usual, but something was different. When Mr. Krabs yelled at him to clean the floors, SpongeBob stood still, spatula in hand, and said, "Why don't you do it yourself?" The next morning, he purposefully burned a batch of patties to see if anyone would notice. No one did. That's when he realized they had taken him for granted for so long. And it didn't stop there. SpongeBob's descent into villainy gained momentum fast. He began undermining everyone who had ever hurt him. Next, he stops wearing his usual white shirt and tie. He trades them in for a sleek black outfit, still square-shaped of course, but menacing. Oh, and the shoes? They're leather. Why? Because nothing screams villain arc like leather shoes. The next step? Reclaim the Krabby Patty. SpongeBob sneaks into the Krusty Krab after hours and perfects the recipe. But he doesn't stop there. He adds a secret ingredient, a chemical compound that makes the patties addictive. Of course, he took Plankton's help here in exchange of the promise of giving him the secret recipe. And boom, Bikini Bottom's residents can't get enough, and soon they're lining up outside SpongeBob's underground food truck operation, the Krusty Black Market. And this isn't just about revenge, it's about proving a point. SpongeBob's patties become so popular that the Krusty Krab starts losing customers. Mr. Krabs, desperate to win them back, begs SpongeBob to return, but SpongeBob's not interested in coming back to his old job. Oh no, he's got bigger plans. As his operation grows, SpongeBob's demeanor changes. He's no longer the happy-go-lucky sponge who sings about imagination. He's calculating, ruthless, and eerily calm. This is when he decides to open up his own restaurant. Suddenly, SpongeBob is a mastermind, controlling an entire town with snack food. You'd think SpongeBob and Plankton would be a match made in evil heaven, but here's the twist. SpongeBob quickly outsmarts him. At first, he plays innocent in front of Plankton and makes him believe that he is really hurt because of Mr. Krabs. Of course, Plankton believes that SpongeBob just wants revenge, but SpongeBob has other plans. Slowly, he starts manipulating Karen, and he succeeds in convincing her to work for him. In fact, he succeeds in convincing Karen to divorce Plankton and marry him instead. Obviously, he didn't fall in love with Karen, he just wanted to use her AI-powered brain. Plankton's all like, "I finally have a partner," and SpongeBob's like, "Nah, I'm not gonna believe anyone now. I am a solo player." Plankton tries to rebel, but SpongeBob shuts him down with one perfectly executed sarcastic glare. And then there's the jellyfish. SpongeBob starts recruiting them, attaching tiny mind control devices to their tentacles. These jellyfish become his enforcers, zapping anyone who dares to oppose him. Bikini Bottom transforms into a dystopian underwater nightmare where every move is monitored by glowing electrified jellyfish. The scariest part? SpongeBob's bubbly personality isn't entirely gone. He still smiles, but it's this slow, unsettling grin that makes your spine tingle. And every so often, he slips in a cheerful "I'm ready" before launching another sinister plan. The once lovable sponge now rules the town, and it's not about money or fame, it's about control. Every good morning in Bikini Bottom is now met with dread, because you never know when SpongeBob's going to show up. Flip your life upside down and smile while doing it. SpongeBob's transformation shatters his relationships. Patrick tries to apologize for his behavior, and SpongeBob apparently forgives him, but he doesn't become the old best friend he used to be. And let's be honest, Patrick's not exactly equipped to handle evil SpongeBob. The more SpongeBob dives into his schemes, the more Patrick feels like he's talking to a stranger. There's this heartbreaking moment where Patrick visits SpongeBob hoping for a classic jellyfishing session, only to find SpongeBob surrounded by blueprints for mind control devices. Patrick blurts out, "What happened to the SpongeBob who laughed at everything?" SpongeBob just gives him the unsettling grin and says, "He grew up, Patrick. Maybe it's time you did too." Ouch! And he crawls away out of the Krusty Krab. Sandy tries to intervene as well, but her scientific approach only makes things worse. She attempts to reason with SpongeBob, running calculations about the moral consequences of his actions. But SpongeBob, now sharp and calculating, throws her logic right back at her. "You're the one who always said survival of the fittest," he quips. "Well, guess what? I'm just doing what it takes to survive." Even Squidward can't escape the ripple effects. SpongeBob's mind-controlled jellyfish start patrolling the neighborhood, and Squidward's clarinet practice is constantly interrupted by their eerie buzzing. When Squidward tries to confront SpongeBob, he's met with an unnerving reply. "You should thank me, Squidward. I've made the world quieter for you." It's the most twisted form of neighborly care imaginable. And Bikini Bottom as a whole, under SpongeBob's rule, is like a dystopian nightmare wrapped in a cheerful bubble wrap. At first, the changes seem harmless. SpongeBob's addictive new patties are a hit, and the townsfolk are practically lining up around the block. But soon, the side effects kick in. People start to notice they're unable to think clearly without a Krabby Patty fix. Productivity plummets, and Bikini Bottom turns into a town of patty junkies. Then there's the Jellyfish Army. SpongeBob outfits them with mind control helmets and sends them to patrol the streets, ensuring absolute loyalty. At first, the citizens think it's a quirky new law enforcement system. Typical SpongeBob antics, right? But it quickly becomes clear that these jellyfish answer only to him. Bikini Bottom becomes a surveillance state where everyone lives in constant fear of being zapped for even the smallest sign of rebellion. Meanwhile, the townsfolk start to divide into two groups, those loyal to SpongeBob's new order and those trying to resist. The resistance, led by Sandy and Patrick, begins to form plans to overthrow SpongeBob, but it's an uphill battle. SpongeBob, with his jellyfish enforcers and his cunning mind, is always one step ahead. By the time the full consequences of SpongeBob's actions are clear, Bikini Bottom is barely recognizable. The once happy town is now a shadow of its former self, trapped under the rule of a sponge who no longer believes in the power of fun and friendship. But even villains aren't immune to self-doubt. For all his newfound power, SpongeBob occasionally wrestles with the echoes of his former self. Late at night, when Bikini Bottom is silent and his jellyfish patrols hum faintly in the distance, he sits alone in his underwater lair, Karenified and all. A half-eaten Krabby Patty sits next to him, reminding him of simpler times when his only concern was perfecting the grill. He flips through his photo album, seeing snapshots of his life before the villain arc. Jellyfishing with Patrick, karate with Sandy, those moments when Squidward begrudgingly tolerated his existence. For a brief moment, SpongeBob feels something he thought he'd buried, a pang of regret. And Gary, oh Gary, SpongeBob keeps a small shrine dedicated to his late snail. A photo of them together sits atop a makeshift pedestal, surrounded by jellyfish jelly candles. He whispers, "If only you were still here, Gare Bear, you'd understand." Karen notices these moments of vulnerability. She tries to recalibrate his emotions, AI logic at its finest. But SpongeBob snaps back, telling her that he is fine and that empathy is for the weak. But then, one day, Patrick sneaks into his lair one night, pleading with SpongeBob to stop his madness. Patrick holds up an old jellyfishing net, the one they used to share, and says, "Please, SpongeBob, you don't have to do this." And he doesn't stop there. He goes on to grab SpongeBob's old photo album and hurls it at him. The book lands at SpongeBob's feet, flipping open to a picture of him, Patrick, and Gary laughing together. SpongeBob freezes, his sinister grin faltering. The room seems to go quiet as he stares at all the photos, his hands trembling. Patrick steps forward and tries to remind his friend again that this is who he is. He's not a villain and definitely not a tyrant. He's just a lovey-dovey sponge who loves his friends. SpongeBob collapses to his knees, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He whispers, "What have I done?" The jellyfish army powers down, their helmets short-circuiting as Karen overrides the system, finally siding with the resistance. Bikini Bottom is left in shambles, but its residents are resilient. The Krusty Krab reopens and the townsfolk start rebuilding their lives. SpongeBob, now back in his classic white shirt and tie, goodbye leather pants, works tirelessly to undo the damage he caused. He gives up his secret patty recipe and burns every mind control helmet. He even apologizes to Plankton for stealing Karen, although Plankton's too busy crying tears of joy over her return to notice. SpongeBob's relationships start to heal too. Patrick forgives him instantly because, well, he's Patrick. And then they resume their jellyfishing adventures. Sandy is more cautious, keeping a close eye on SpongeBob, but she eventually softens when he helps her rebuild her tree dome. Even Squidward grudgingly admits that life was more tolerable with him around. And that's the twisted tale of what happens when SpongeBob flips the script. But now it's your turn. What if scenario should I tackle next? Drop your ideas in the comments, and who knows, your suggestion might just inspire the next episode. Until then, stay tuned.